Hello, everybody. Welcome along to the Event Industry News podcast with me, James Dickson. Wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you tune in to today's episode from. And on today's episode, a subject that has been, I suppose, touched on is maybe the best way to describe it so far, because there's loads more that we will inevitably talk about this subject in the coming weeks, the coming months, and the coming years. And it's a subject that I'm still slightly vague on, I suppose. I like to consider myself somebody who is fairly tech savvy and has an understanding of things, but the metaverse is still something that I wouldn't say is alien to me, but as I said, it is slightly fuzzy, maybe the right way to describe it. We have had guests on here previously, just in recent months, talking about the metaverse and what it could potentially mean for the events industry. Is it going to be the absolute deal breaker? Is everybody going to be using it? We've heard people tell us that there are unlimited possibilities with it, but we're not so sure that it is quite as easy as that. And perhaps that's something that maybe we're going to address and get into with our guests today on the podcast. First of all, our guest, and I must take a breath before I introduce our first guest to ensure that I get correct pronunciation of the name. Caroline McGuckian is the CEO of Meshh. Caroline founded Meshh in February 2016, and today it is a global leader in Wi-Fi analytics for fan and visitor behavior. Caroline, a very warm welcome to the Event Industry News podcast.
Hello, James. Thank you for having me.
And our second guest today, and I'm always excited to say second guest because it means there's far less work for me to do on these podcasts when there are two people to talk to, is Jack Jacob. Jack is the managing director and founder of the Partnership Network Events, an entrepreneur who founded PNE from his kitchen table in 2018. Jack, a very warm welcome to the Event Industry News podcast.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, James. Appreciate it.
No problem at all. And as I said, the metaverse, I'm sure, like many people who work in this industry, I consider myself to be fairly tech savvy and have an understanding of things technical, but the metaverse is still a bit of an unknown entity for me. I'm still waiting on that sort of silver bullet explanation that really puts it into layman's terms what it is and what it could potentially do for us. Caroline, come to you first. As I said at the beginning, I've heard people describe it as something that will give us unlimited possibilities with the events industry, and we will never need to go places again. We can do everything in this virtual world. Where would you like to start on this one? Does it present unlimited possibilities, or are we still at a phase where, like me, many people are still slightly cloudy about it?
Well, I think you can't define it because it doesn't exist. This utopian experience that we're all going to live our lives through, that is as yet very unclear, is generously a work in progress. And how it evolves and what it becomes, I think, will be dictated and directed by hopefully consumers applying some common sense and understanding how it adds value to their life as a whole. So at the moment, there's a lot of people with commercial interest in defining or having their definition of the metaverse being adopted. I haven't seen much demand from the consumer, the man on the street, in terms of their needs being fulfilled through the metaverse. So at the moment, it's all a bit sort of push rather than pull, I think, which is why it's not very clear, because there's a lot of stakeholders and everybody has a different perspective, and there isn't any kind of unified approach today. So the reason that none of us can define it is because there isn't an it. There are many, many it's.
Absolutely. Where is the distinction between, I suppose, what the metaverse is and what we've got at the moment in terms of digital event platforms? Are we already taking advantage of a metaverse unknowingly, Jack? Or is the metaverse more sophisticated than just digital event platforms and a bit of virtual reality?
Well, I hope so, because in my experience, virtual event platforms weren't brilliant. Certainly our experience of using virtual event platforms weren't brilliant. I think there's two elements to it. I think you've got one that's the conference side, and people being able to engage and listen to speakers and learn and share best practice and all those good things that we do at conferences and events. I think the second side of it is depends how you're funded, right? If you're funded through sponsorship, if you have exhibitors, how do you drive people to engage with them? You know, let's think about this logically. You know, if you're a chief exec or a chief operating officer or a budget holder and you're fairly senior in your organization, are you realistically going to walk around virtual stands when it's hard enough to do that in a real life setting anyway, to discover stuff? So I think it really depends on where you're funded from. I think going back to the point of, you know, what's the difference between the two, I don't know yet, and I think that no one knows yet. I think that there's elements where the metaverse probably does have its place, and I think, you know, in the world of gaming, things like that. So you look at, I don't game, I'm not a gamer, but I think just things that my children play, you know, Fortnite, Roblox. You know, I see them as quite, you know, you enter this world and you have an avatar and you're able to speak, engage, play, shoot, whatever it is that you do, right, in these things. And actually going back to when I was younger and played, you know, you had like Grand Theft Auto and you'd enter this world, right? And it's and so on. Now I look into now an event setting. You know, why do we do events? What is the calling? It's because we bring people together. We have that, you know, an event for me is the successability of an event is something that you can't see, and it's that vibe in the room. And how do you replicate that in an online, in a metaverse setting?
Well, there have been certainly, I suppose, attempts to do things virtually. And I think it's important when we're talking about events. Often on this podcast, we go down the route, understandably, of conferences, of exhibitions, of things like that. But, you know, for me, as somebody who's always been a huge music fan, somebody who's played music, you know, a live music event often is a great sort of a reference point for examples like this, I feel, because, you know, you can't replicate the feel of being in the room with air moving, as I'd like to describe it, you know, feeling, you know, the sound hitting your chest when you're in that room. And, you know, a virtual event is going to be, or a metaverse held event is a gig is going to have to be something really sophisticated and immersive for me to want to do that in place of a live experience, Caroline.
The reason that those moments matter is because we have five senses, right? The metaverse can't cater to those five senses. It may cater better to one, but that kind of emotion, those kind of memories, right, are triggered by what you touch, what you smell, what you taste, the beer in your hand, the sort of the holding your husband's hand while your favorite song comes on, whatever it might be. It's those are the stuff that make the event not a viewing experience, but a participating and an engaging experience. And no platform is going to be able to replicate that. There is always going to be a place for the amplification of those things. There's going to be technology to support a broader distribution of some of that content. But replication of live events, no, I don't. My faith in human nature will be destroyed if we replace live experiences with screen-based, you know, emotive moments. I'll just go and crawl into a cave. Maybe I'm just a middle-aged lady, and you know, I can't see the future. But I will be very, very distraught if humanity ends up being fulfilled through screens.
And that's interesting you say that, because we're really being, I feel like we're really being sold it at the moment.
Yes, we are.
From a number of avenues. I mean, even when you look at something really, really obvious, but it's important to state, you know, you look at Facebook changing the name of the group to Meta, you know, that there are companies that are very much, you know, not necessarily in the event space, but people who face consumers on a daily basis to millions and millions of people around the world, are really sort of selling this idea of it to us surreptitiously.
Yeah, Jet's already mentioned it. Follow the money, right? Do you think that's for my benefit? Do you think that Facebook has rebranded itself and repositioned itself for my benefit or for the benefit of its shareholders? I would suggest that that's a very interesting tightrope, and that if you look at the commercial realities of the group's existing platforms, so Facebook, Instagram, they've ridden their wave, right? They are no longer what they were. However, the valuation of those businesses needs to be maintained. They need the next big thing. They need the look over here, shiny toy. And we decided it was the metaverse, and it's a very big bet. And off we go. Let's go all in and change the name. So they are making an all-in bet on something, but it's driven because, in my opinion, the shareholders of those businesses require constant and ongoing innovation, and user numbers are going down on those platforms, not up, and therefore you need to do something else.
Well, it's interesting. For context, I should say to people listening to this and watching this today that we're recording it on the 12th of September. And later on today, so I don't know when that later episode is going to be broadcast, we are talking about some of the statistics that have been collated in the last 6 months or so as to how many people are attending in-person events and the popularity of them. And the trend, wherever you read at the moment, you don't have to dig too deep, Jack, to find that the trend is very much that people are not just back to in-person events, but more enthusiastic about them than ever, in seeing what they can deliver for them, both from a business point of view, from an emotional point of view, if it's a consumer event. And I guess that's potentially going to lead to an even bigger push from these tech companies who are trying to sell us the metaverse, given that in-person really seems to have had a resurgence since the pandemic.
Sure. Yeah. And all of those things that you've said there are absolutely what we're seeing. We've had the most events we've ever done. We've had the most people sign up to the events that we put on, in terms of delegate numbers. We've had the most sponsors we've ever had. We've had the largest programs of speakers we've ever had. So without a doubt, face-to-face events are back. I think, we've got to look at kind of the metaverse in a number of ways. And we've gone back to the point around, what Facebook are doing and or Meta are doing, and obviously there's other big players in this space, and I can't pretend that I'm an expert at all, because I'm not. And it's this whole Web 3.0 movement, this whole Web 3.0 movement, and around blockchain and NFTs and crypto, and it's all kind of all of these. I think those four major things, blockchain, NFTs, crypto, and metaverse, for me, make up Web 3.0, and I may be wrong. I think there's an element of, what could it potentially be good for, right? Is there an equality piece here? If you've got developing countries, well, not just countries, but continents, is there a possibility where we can potentially get the leading professor in medicine, for example, to deliver a seminar, some form of seminar in the metaverse, where people from around the world can listen to the leading professor and not need to be in the room, but have that immersive experience. I think that's the key thing, isn't it? It's the immersive experience. Do I believe that they'll work in an event setting, or it will work in an event setting? I don't, because of all those things you mentioned previously, the in the room, the touching, the holding, the smelling, the hearing, the ambience, the vibe, etc.
Sure.
So I think we really need to categorize where we see this technology working. There is absolutely a space for it. There's no doubt in that. Otherwise you wouldn't have the biggest companies in the world. And you know, is that space the next thing that happens in e-commerce? Is it that, you know, these big brands, you know, the Louis Vuittons, the Chanels, the, you know, the big major banks, etc., have these stores that you walk into and you look around and you have your, I don't buy into this, by the way, but you have your avatar and you try your jacket on and blah, blah, blah. It still doesn't give you your touch, your smell, your feel, etc., and all that, just to be clear. I'm just playing devil's advocate.
Sure. Yeah.
But is that the space for it? I just don't see it in a certainly in the events that we run, where our model is a hosted buyer model. We bring together essentially kind of buyers from a certain industry to listen and learn and engage and network from, and they make up the same kind of speakers. And then we sell to, and that's how we're funded. We sell to typically tech firms, as well as services companies that then want to have face time with those people, want to have meetings, want to showcase what they do in regards to presentations, sit with them at dinner, have a drink, get to know them on more of a personal level. That's impossible to replicate. We tried to do it, you know, in 2020 with our virtual events, and, you know, as I alluded to at the start, the virtual events, you know, we had to go and we failed, and, you know, we failed fast. We done 2, and my team went back on furlough after, because it was more damaging for our reputation. It was good for the industries that we work within, because the people that funded it did not get any engagement whatsoever. And so I just don't see it happening. And then from a practical sense, you know, imagine sat there, realistically, imagine you sat there with this stupidly large headset on your own, in your bedroom or in your office. Well, you've got headphones on, at least you can see, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, if we're talking about a full immersive experience, come off it. Are you going to sit there like a donut for 4 hours with a bloody headset on?
I appreciate your candor, because you know, as the person who hosts a podcast, you know, there should be an air of impartiality, but I'm inclined to agree with you. You know, I think I come back to the old adage of horses for courses. You know, and it may seem like a ridiculous comparison, but, you know, you look in the food industry. You know, there is space for Greg's, and there is also space for Ramon Blanc, Le Manuel Cat Saison, with his 12-course tasting menu at £8 million a head, or whatever he charges. You know, it's horses for courses. I've no doubt that in the right context, as you described, the pharmaceutical industry, for example, where, you know, historically there are people who fly in from, you know, international destinations to come for these pharmaceutical gatherings. You know, in the right context, there is undoubtedly possibility for people to have these type of events, but by the same token, you know, it's not going to be the transformative, everyone's going down that route that some people have alluded to, I think.
Well, imagine this. Imagine if there was a seat at the Queen's funeral that you could have in Westminster Abbey, and you had to stick a headset on for an hour. You'd probably do it. You know, imagine being, and then, you know, you wouldn't be in the room, but imagine if you could look around and there was a camera there that was a 360 camera, and you could kind of have different depths and so on and so forth. And you had the seat next to Charles, right? King Charles now. You'd probably do that. It would be quite a good experience to do. You're not going to get a seat in there, realistically, are you?
It's a great sort of example to give, because you're right. If that was made public, they and charged a $5 a ticket and gave the money to good causes, they'd raise billions in that context. But again, it goes back to horses for courses and the right thing for the right event, Caroline.
Well, I think that one of the things that Jack said earlier is critical. You use the word learn, listen and learn. And I think you're absolutely right, by the way. I know that I was sounded a little bit sort of negative towards the metaverse. It's more a case of, I believe it'll have a place. I just hope that it's not ubiquitous. So I fully can envisage an environment where you can learn. And you can learn in more detail. You can learn by seeing, potentially learn by doing, depending on how the headset technology moves on, and hand controls. And, you know, there's, and that I think will potentially also fit with a kind of walled garden narrative, because for the ubiquity of experience, you need a ubiquity of accessibility, right? So what's everybody building? Everybody's building their own variation on a theme here. So we're going to end up with like, I don't know, 10, 100, 1,000 metaverses, or I mean, I don't know. It's it's above my pay
You've got to
grade.
work out the plural, yeah.
And who controls that, and how do they make money, and how does everybody else use it, and who develops in what language for it, and so on and so forth, and what hardware works and what's compatible and what doesn't. And like, my head hurts already. I mean, I have enough problems switching mobile phones, right? So I'm not even just gonna think about that. But I can see a place where it's incredibly useful for education, learning, development, for communicating what is traditionally more complex, in-depth requirements. So things like pharma, medicine, engineering, those, I suppose, functional areas. Ultimately, from a functional, operational perspective, it's going to be a great tool.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's an emotive environment. I mean, I'll give you also mentioned gaming earlier. So we've just done a piece of work for Twitch.
Yeah.
Right. Twitch is obviously much bigger than just, but it began in the gaming world. But the work that we did was to measure their 3-day face-to-face TwitchCon experience. So they're moving out of just being screen-based. They recognize that their streamers, players, consumers want it to have human interactions. So they're creating a series of, so they're coming from a world whereby you are an avatar, you are not now, you are a digital version of yourself, a screen-based version of yourself. And in demand from those people, they're creating physical events for people to go to. I mean, it was madness. The emotions were, I mean, these people were, I mean, I imagine it was like the Beatles. I mean, they were screaming and it's so excited about being in each other's company. It was fabulous and terrifying at the same time, by the way. It was just, but I find it really interesting that after 18 months of not being able to see each other, the huge surge to be at these kinds of things is incredibly powerful, and the need to have human connection was very, very tangible.
And the gaming one, we've spoken about this on the podcast before. The gaming one, I always think, is a brilliant sort of, again, parallel or comparison to draw to. I think there's a huge amount that the wider events industry can learn and can learn and continue to learn from the gaming industry. And you look at the rise of esports. Esports tournaments could be played completely online, because that's where 99.9% of those games are played on a daily basis, is online. And yet, when they have their esports tournaments, they gather people together in a convention center. They put up big screens. They put up AV. They bring in all the stuff that we would bring in production-wise for any other event, and they get people in a room. Why? Because the roar of the crowd, the adrenaline buzz that you get from seeing those people and the reaction that they give you, which you can't send adrenaline down a Cat5 cable and into somebody's headphones. Not yet, anyway.
I think what we've not mentioned, which is, I think, sums it up perfectly, is community. And actually, how do you, yes, there isn't an element of community online, and through the following that your company or you personally have on social media and so on, and those kind of, that dialogue online. But actually, I think the reason that that esports example is a brilliant example there of, it's an online based thing, but actually at their major tournaments they bring in everyone together in a room to feel that, and it's because of community. It's because it's to get that t-shirt to say that you was there, or it's to send that, to put that video up on your story to say, I was there, I was in the room. It's that kind of badge of honor. I was one of the few that was lucky enough to actually attend this, and so on. So I think that, can you replicate that in-person community online? I think from what we said, virtually impossible. Now this is virtual technology, so virtually might be possible, right? But I just can't see it.
Well, again, maybe silly sort of comparisons to draw, but if you offered, I've got a 16-year-old son who's mad on football, and if I said, right, you can meet Kylian Mbappe in the metaverse for 10 minutes, or you can meet him for 10 seconds in person and get a selfie with him, he'd choose option 2 every day of the week. Okay, I'm using an extreme celebrity example, but going back to what we were saying about community, a lot of online communities, particularly in the gaming culture, are built, and the person's avatar or their username, however they are profiled on the game. But there's nothing like then going into a room and going, oh wow, you're X3F75 on FIFA, nice to meet you.
Here's one we don't talk about. My avatar could be blonde and thin and have green eyes. I mean,
I could have hair.
Avatars, you can represent yourself in whatever way you choose, I suppose.
I'd be Keith Richards, just for the record.
Well,
I'd definitely be Keith Richards.
How real is all of this? And then who's judge and jury? Who says it's okay and it's not okay to represent or misrepresent yourself? Where does that start to?
Well, it's bad enough on social media at the moment, isn't it?
We're gonna need longer for this chat, aren't we?
Yeah. As I said, you raise another point there, which ties into social media and issues that we've had with online abuse. On things like Instagram and Twitter platforms, where people can remain anonymous, hidden behind profiles that are easy to set up, behind pictures that they can get off Google Images in 2 clicks of a button. That there is, if we've not yet policed, if that's the right phrase to use, if we've not yet policed that world effectively to eliminate some of the problems that those worlds create, then potentially the metaverse is taking that and times 10.
Yeah, it was my fault earlier. Actually, is where's the governance? Who has the it's not a jurisdictional thing, is it? Right? It's in the internet. There is no borders. There is no kind of countries or lines. So
time zones. It is just there.
Yeah. Who polices that? Who is the person?
Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah. Say that again. Sorry.
Mark Zuckerberg.
Good. Let us hope not.
Yeah, indeed.
Let us hope not. We've flown through time today. We're coming up to sort of half an hour on today's podcast, and I always have 1 hour time at this point so that we can maybe start covering a last few points. And the sort of thing that I'd like to maybe talk about finally is a reversal maybe of what we've spoken about so far, maybe a sort of a devil's advocate type opinion. I remember in the early to mid 90s, when I was sort of a teenager, and Blue Peter used to still be on TV, actual terrestrial TV, at about 5 o'clock. And they started to give out this thing called an email address. And then they started to give out this thing called a website. And they'd say, if you want to look at our website, it's www. And if you want to send us an email, it's at. I thought, what are these? Why are they giving out 2 things? Are they not the same? What's the difference? I was really I remember being really confused about it, and then find out about this thing called the internet. And slowly but surely, things just sort of evolved, and we adopted it. But I remember clearly the confusion that I felt when I first started to hear about websites and emails, and thinking, what on God's earth is the difference between these 2 things, and what is the internet? Are we at a similar stage now? Do we think that in 5 years' time, if the 3 of us got, back onto this, we would have a clear idea about what the metaverse is? Or do we think it's going to be much longer, and it is going to be a sort of a much longer term rollout for us to realize what it could be?
Shall I come in?
Please, Jack. Yeah. Jump in.
I think that 5 years' time, if we don't have a better understanding, it's because it didn't happen. Now, do I think it's going to happen? Absolutely. There's too many big players involved for it not to happen. But what I think we'll have some early adopters. We'll have some people that put some money into it and have some, really start by kind of dipping their toe in the water, or in fact jumping all the way in. And where I think that will be is, I think that will be major brands. I think that there's, again, talk of these meta worlds, and there's a few kind of big ones, right? And I think that you'll start to see some kind of major brands start to enter those worlds, because perhaps we're the wrong generation to be talking about this as well. Perhaps it's, what's the generation after? Is it Gen Z after millennials? Because I'm a millennial, and I don't know.
Yeah,
the one after me. And maybe I'm a millennial that's perhaps maybe not a millennial.
Wiser before your time?
Yeah, maybe so. I doubt it, but maybe so. So, is it that we're the wrong target market to start with? Is it the case where actually, is it a case where events, we've had our dip in the toe with virtual events, a lot of people were put off, and so is it a case where actually the direction of travel for the metaverse is elsewhere? And I anticipate it is elsewhere anyway, just to be clear. So going back to your question, 5 years time, will we know a bit more about it? I believe so, because I think that's definitely, you don't have Facebook changing to Meta and then them kind of going full force into this world, and then plus other stuff that's happening with regards to crypto and blockchain and NFTs and so on and so forth, right? There is definitely a move for that way. But a bit like crypto, I think there'll be, some early adopters that may do very well or may indeed not. And then similarly, those that, and the majority that join the party where they feel it's still early, but actually fairly late in comparison to the early adopters, maybe is the boat been missed, but actually from an opportunity perspective, a commercial opportunity perspective, but indeed there to use in a sense, more of a consumer-based world rather than a business-to-business based world.
Sure. Caroline, I just wonder if you might give us your thought on something that Jack said then, as we start wrapping up on that sort of generational question. And again, just while you were saying that, Jack,
did you just call me old?
No, not at all. Because I'm gonna reference the fact that I mentioned my son who's 16 years old, and as I inadvertently just used 5 years as the time reference, but 5 years on from now he's going to be 21. So potentially, literally just wrapping up. If he chooses to go to university, he will have just graduated and heading out into the big wide world for jobs. And he has grown up, in a world where he has a PlayStation, where he plays against people online all the time. He's grown up in a world of smartphones. And as Jack said, are we maybe asking some of these questions and not giving enough thought to the fact that actually it might not be us that needs to understand this? It's the next generation who are going to be working in 5 years.
I mean, yes, we're the impact on us is going to be considerably less than the impact, and possibly not even on your 16-year-old, but perhaps on Jack's younger children. Until you have a generation that has grown up not knowing anything else, that is when it will become an intrinsic part of life. We will always remember the time before the website. We will always remember the time before the phone. We will always remember the time before social media. And as a result, that colors and limits our approach to it. It fits into our life in a different way, right? It fits into our repertoire of tools differently than it does if you're 8 today and 48 next. The use cases and relationship that you have with technology evolves over time.
Sure.
And so I think in 5 years, we'll still have this conversation. And I think your 21-year-old will still go for a job interview with a real person.
I
Right?
hope so.
I think in 25 years, apart from the fact that I will very much be on a beach with a pina colada, not doing this. But
in the metaverse or in real life?
Sorry? Oh, no, most definitely. I will have sand between my toes, Jack. I will send you a postcard. That I do think in 25 years we will be looking at something that we don't relate to and we don't understand, and we'll be like, what's wrong with a good book? You know. But that's the pace of change, right? That's we are all on this journey and we don't really know the end, and some of it makes it uncomfortable. And I feel a little bit sad. I'll feel sad, but if it goes too far and what people miss, and there's some sort of weird dystopian world, but by that point I'll be sitting on a beach with a sand between my toes and pina colada. So good luck.
We'll all just storm an events venue, barricade ourselves in, and play music and talk to people for until we're kicked out.
We'll probably get arrested.
Yeah, like the apocalypse. We'll just be that me just in Sheffield Arena with a guitar and a speaker, desperately looking for somewhere to plug it into, because there's no such thing as wired power anymore.
Exactly.
I don't know. Who knows where we're going to be? And I suppose that's a good way to wrap up today. Who knows where we're going to be? That is very much the case at the moment. As I said at the beginning, we've spoken about the metaverse on this podcast previously, and there are advocates for it out there who say it will be almost a silver bullet for the events industry. It's going to offer these unlimited possibilities. But as we've so sort of interestingly highlighted and discussed today with examples and comment, it is still very much the unknown at the moment. And I think if you would ask 100 people who works in the events industry, is this going to change things significantly? Are people going to stop coming face to face? I would suspect that the vast majority of those people will have similar views to the ones that we've expressed today, which is that you cannot replicate the feelings, the emotions, the trust. I think that's a word that we maybe not used, but there is certainly a trust element, particularly at business events, where the shake of the hand, the looking in the eyes, the meeting of that person, the body language across the table, Jack, at the networking events. You struggle to replicate the sort of trust that you build in people by seeing them in a room face to face and in person. And I think that's going to be a real tough nut to crack, but one that no doubt we shall continue to discuss on the podcasts. Caroline and Jack, before we wrap up today's podcast, let's give you both a little opportunity to just tell our podcast followers a little bit about how they can get in touch with you if they want to find out about your respective companies. Caroline, first to you. If people want to find out about Meshh and what you guys do, how do they do that? How do they get in touch with you?
Really simple. Caroline@meshh.com or www.meshh.com, and feel free to have a look and reach out if you're interested in understanding a little bit more about your live experiences.
And we should point out, Caroline, if I'm not mistaken, Meshh is 2 H's, double H at the end. So meshh.com, but with a double H at the end of Meshh. Excellent. Fabulous. And Jack, similarly, partnership network events, if people want to find out what you guys are up to, how do they get in touch?
Yeah, certainly. So LinkedIn's probably a good place to find me. So Jack Jacob. And then the email is jack@pne-uk.com. But do connect if you're listening. We're on a huge growth trajectory, and would be well, we're sharing the journey. So do connect.
And let's give a shout out. We did discuss it off air beforehand. You're looking for people at the moment, Jack. Go on. Let's give the shout out, because we were talking about recruitment on the podcast on an episode last week. And there'll be people listening to this who might want to change a scenery or a new opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, we're looking for a number of people across sales, production, delegate acquisition. We've got a senior marketing role as well. We're looking for our first marketing director. We're currently outsourcing our marketing, but we're bringing that in-house and developing a marketing team, starting with clearly a marketing director to then develop that team. So certainly if you're a senior marketing director or senior marketeer rather, and can operate at marketing director level, then please definitely do get in touch, because I'd love not to pay a recruitment fee.
Brilliant. To you both, thank you very much today. Our guests today on the podcast have been Caroline McGuckian, CEO from Meshh, and Jack Jacob, the Managing Director and founder of Partnership Network Events. Thanks to you both for joining the podcast today. It's been great. And please do come back on. Let's pick up this conversation, further down the line. I often invite people back on, in 2 or 3 months' time, but maybe this is going to be like sort of Pulse Disco 2000. We're all going to meet up in 5 years' time and with headsets on. And see where we stand. Of course, if you are listening to this podcast today on one of your audio platforms, don't forget that you can head over to eventindustrynews.com to check out video versions of all of our podcasts. And while you're there, you can then look at the latest news, features and special supplements that are on the eventindustrynews.com website, as well, of course, as the legendary A to Z supplier directory. If you're an organizer looking for a particular product or service within the events industry, the A to Z supplier directory on eventindustrynews.com is the place to go. And of course, if you are already watching this on that website, thank you very much for tuning in. Don't forget you can subscribe in the opposite direction by going to wherever you get your podcasts from, and you can access audio versions of all of the Event Industry News podcasts, which brings us nicely to the end of today's episode. Our thanks again to Caroline and Jack for joining us today on the podcast. We will see you on the next edition. Thanks very much, everybody, for tuning in. Stay safe, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks.